Hey, hello everyone. I just heard the recording has started, so I think we are ready to go. Yeah, thanks for joining us today for our webinar regarding Power Platform and Azure Analytics. Um, Today I would like to explain a little bit about our platform, but the focus will be best practice analytics. So basically how we can analyze systems and say, okay, what's going on behind the scenes here? Because many scenarios we don't know what's actually going on. Yeah, we have some ideas where we can have to look at and so on, but it's always a very time-consuming thing, and at the end, we are losing money. So this is the focus where we should take a closer look at best practice analytics and, of course, how we can do it in an automated way. Because if you do it manually, you need a lot of knowledge, you need a lot of time and so on. So we try to have a process where we can have automated analytics all the time without any manual interaction. And yeah, and our scope today is Power Platform, Azure, and Dynamics. Of course, there are a lot of other technologies. We will see an overview, but basically for today, I think it's enough to understand the idea. So let's take a look at the platform. So as I said, I would like to show you something about best practice analytics, but also architecture visualization. So basically, okay, which components do we have in our system and how they communicate with each other. And the whole thing is based on our platform. It's called Process Insights. It's a web platform where you can analyze your system. You have different integrations to DevOps, where the source code is, and also to Azure and so on. So you can basically integrate your whole landscape and see what's going on. So at the end, it's very simple. You don't need any technical knowledge. So you don't have to understand, okay, how to read code, how to write code, how to configure some components. If you would like to know, okay, what happens if I go to my system, if I create an account, what's going on? Yeah. So you can do that. So as a functional person, you will see everything what's going on. And of course, if you need additional help, you have support, you have links. So it's very easy for you to understand, okay, what's going on in your system without any technical background. So let's take a quick look at the agenda. It's a very simple one. The first and second part is more or less about functional topics. So we do not talk about coding. We do not talk about how to find issues in the code. It's more functional side, as I said, how to analyze the system and so on. And the second part is a little bit more about technical details. So how we can analyze the code, how we can apply best practices, and of course, how we can how we can track the changes if something goes wrong. And as always, at the end, we have some time for Q&A. I think the whole main content is more or less about 45 minutes, and then we can talk about different questions. So let's start. Before we do that, a quick introduction about our company. So for those of you who don't know us, we are Kupp Software based in Austria. We are a Microsoft partner, and we actually are focused on development tools, so quality tools for example, CI/CD concepts, so how you can automate the deployments. So like, okay, you have the solutions, you have the configuration data and so on. So you don't have to do all of those things manually. In most cases, enterprise projects. So of course, in the small projects, you don't have such a high risk of errors and so on, because usually you have a small team and you can talk to the people. But in enterprise context, you change people, you have different teams, different dependencies and so on. So it's very hard to figure out, okay, what are the dependencies, what are the processes between the different components and so on. So this is basically what we do, and we do that for the whole stack. Of course, focus on Microsoft technology, but we do it for code-based components, local-based components, but also for big enterprise environments with a lot of things in Azure and so on. So this is more or less what we do. And today I would like to introduce our platform Process Insights, which is actually this one. And the most important thing is the reason why we do that. As I already said, it's about money at the end. I mean, of course, it's nice to have a stable system and to say, okay, we have quality gates, we have this and that. But at the end, if we can save money with that, that's the most important point, yeah. Because I've seen that so many times in different projects when you have a lot of things and you put it to production and then you really have the problems there, yeah. So in most cases, you have good systems to monitor the environment and to see, okay, what's going on. You will be notified immediately, but this is already too late. It's already lost the money, and then it's pretty hard to find the resources together, the developers and so on, the infrastructure guys. You need basically everybody to fix that. And of course, this is a very unhappy situation. So what we are trying to do is so fix those things first before they actually reach production. And the reason, or actually the way how we can do that, will be explained in the next slides. But before we do that, let's focus a little bit on the different types. By the way, we will see a live demo, so we will see at least one example for all of those categories. But let's think about it for a second. I mean, regarding performance, it's always nice. Yeah, I love to say crash now, crash later, because if you crash immediately on a development system, it's easy, right? You have no cost at all. You just fix it and that's it. Yeah, but in most cases, especially regarding performance, you see the production because you have more data and so on, and then it's already too late. Yeah, so this is one major problem. The second thing is about deployment. I've seen it in many different projects when people telling me, yeah, it's just a small change. Yeah, do it manually on the dev environment and then the integration environment and so on. But those manual changes are very painful for the guys who have to deploy to production because they don't know, right? So this is another thing where we have to make sure that we have quality gates for those things, and common coding issues and so on. I'm not talking about the things where I say, okay, you got null pointer stuff and basic quality things. I'm talking about specific requirements for Azure and Power Platform and so on, because there are a couple of guidelines, yeah, and if you don't know how to do that, you will have a lot of problems. And yeah, I totally understand if somebody's telling me, okay, we have a good team, we have a lot of people, and we don't do those kind of issues. Yeah, that's fair enough. But at the end, yeah, at least I'm a lazy person. Yeah, I don't want to check that. Yeah. So if you have a new guy in the team and I have to check the same things again and again, yeah, it's, it's annoying. Yeah. So at least I don't like that. And I cannot imagine that anybody else would like to do that. Yeah. So this is why we would like to have those quality gates. And believe me that I've seen it in so many projects. It always goes wrong if you don't do that. Yeah. So let's make our life simpler and improve by implementing quality gates. And the same thing is for integrations and so on. I mean, there are so many different stories, but my favorite thing is cloud readiness. So the last one, the special topic, it's always the same thing. Yeah. So if you have a migration project from on-premise to the cloud, it's always the same thing because the people don't know, okay, what's actually going on. And I'm not talking about the very complex topics. I'm talking about very simple stuff like an integration where I would like to integrate one system to another, and you have to apply some kind of authorization concept, yeah, like MTLM, which is a very bad one, or OAuth and so on. But people sometimes, they don't know, okay, everything which is possible on premise is not always possible in the cloud. Yeah, so you have to change protocols, you have to do a couple of changes. Yeah, maybe you got different DNS stuff and so on. So very basic thing. Yeah, but in many cases, this is the root cause of integration issues. Yeah, the basic stuff, not the complicated things. And those things are actually quite easy to check. Yeah, so let's see what we have. As I said, and this is the last slide before we can start with the live demos. A very simple thing is very common development lifecycle, right? And as I said, in most cases, we have a development thing and so on, a test, whatever. And on production, we have the problems. And of course, production is the most expensive place where you can fix stuff, right? I mean, it's the easiest thing for the developers because if you're lazy, you don't have to test it, right? Put it to production and you will see, yeah. And usually teams say, okay, we don't do that, yeah. But I know that so many people, they really try to do it, but they don't know how to do it, yeah. And at the end, we will see the crashes in production, yeah. And if I refer back to the first place, we would like to save money, so we should not fix stuff in production, right? And this is basically our approach here, yeah. So we don't do live monitoring. So we not try to trace anything in production. We do not connect to production. Our approach is we fix stuff in development. So we only have to connect to development. We analyze the code and so on. So it's more or less like an advanced static analytics concept. So on one side, okay, of course, there's some risks, yeah, because without the runtime, you cannot know, okay, is it this or that? So some cases it's not possible. But in most cases, as I said, the root causes of the problems are very simple ones. And those can be fixed on development. Yeah, so we can make sure, okay, do we have any issues with that or not? And we can do it on development, which is actually the cheapest part, right? So let's see how we can do that. A small thing regarding the technical scope here, I think I will come back to this later. But as I said, we have different layers. But for now, at least for us right now, it's important to understand, okay, we got Power Platform, we got Azure and so on-premise, we got different applications. By the way, the alignment here is just a random order, so it's not related. And then we got different components. The reason why I'm telling you this is because to understand a little bit, okay, what we are talking about. So we have the environments and so on. We're not talking about the APIs. The APIs are basically the least, the smallest level of a component. And this is what we do. We analyze the whole stack. But for us as a user, we don't have to invest, waste our time with this low layer APIs. We can take a look at the systems, application, and components. And this is a very interesting one because it's not needed to have development knowledge. This is a very important statement, because you don't have to take a look at the APIs. We cover that for you. So you have to understand, okay, which platform do you have, which is a very easy one, and which applications, and the rest is pretty clear. So based on that statement, let's move on to our application. As I said, it's called KPI, which is Process Insights, and this is our platform. It's a cloud-based platform where you can integrate to DevOps and other source control systems and so on. And at the end, we can analyze the whole thing for you and give you the results, which means visualization of the whole architecture, different dependencies between your components, but also best practice analytics. And when I'm talking about best practice analytics, it's always interesting to see, is it just a local check? I mean, you can, of course, code some stuff. You can use tools, but if you have a global architecture with dependencies, so you trigger something there, which can break something on the other side. So this is basically what we would like to show you. So we have the whole landscape within one system, and this is the interesting point here. And of course, it's independent of the technology. So we've got a couple of examples here, but at the end, it doesn't matter which APIs and so on, which components, because it's more or less the same, This one is not interesting for us, but I think it's pretty clear. So we have a couple of different use cases for different people. So let's take a look at the different examples. I took some screenshots to give you a small overview, and then we will move on to the live application. But I think it's easier to start with the basic introduction. And those are the key features, basically. As I said, the visualization. So what we see here are actually two different kinds of components. So let's say I have a system with Dataverse, with some Azure functions and so on. So different components. And then I have one event. It's called create account, which is obviously the creation of an account. And I got some incoming and outgoing edges. And that means my component here, in this case, it's a Cloudflow triggered by either directly or service bus. So if I put some item to the service bus, it will be triggered automatically. And this component will create an account. And this is an interesting one, so I don't have to take a look at the details. I only search for account, and then I will see what's going on. And the most important point is I can see, okay, what's going on after that. So what are the follow-up processes? In this case, it's another flow, but also a CRM workflow. And this is a basic example. We'll see a couple of advanced stuff later on. But as I said, this is the visualization part, best practice checks. And that's interesting because based on the knowledge what we already have about the system, about the different calls and different dependencies and so on, we can generate a lot of best practice reports. And of course, some of them are based on patterns, some of them are based on advanced algorithms and so on. So different kind of analytics here. But we see, okay, we have very simple ones like a missing plugin base. You should not use that directly. This is just a medium thing for coders and low-level stuff. So we don't have a version applied to our assemblies and so on. So those are usually not critical. But for example, stateful plugins, this is a thing which can actually cause a lot of issues on production. It seems like a very technical thing, but this is a very tricky one because on UAT, on development and so on, usually you don't have a problem with that, because it's always a matter of, okay, how many calls and how many executions do you have on the system and so on. So it really depends on the workload, but this can basically destroy your whole business logic, So this is why it's a very important one. And as I said, if you have a new developer, new colleague, and somebody is doing something, you can either review the code every time when there's a change here, which is possible, but it's a pretty, lazy thing, a very boring thing, because I can check it, yes, but I would like to focus on the most important thing, the business logic of a pull request, and not, technical things like checks for stateful plugins and so on. So it's much better if you have something like this, and also batch requests, which is also a very high thing. So if you're in the plugin context and you execute a couple of specific requests, which is possible, but you should not do it because there are a couple of side effects. Yeah, there's an explanation for that as well, and so on. So there are a lot of things, and also parallel calls. And this is an interesting one because the people think, okay, you can execute stuff in parallel, which is obviously faster. Yeah, yes, but usually it will crash. Yeah, so a lot of things like this can save you a lot of trouble. Yeah, so this is why we have that, and this is one of the most powerful features of the whole thing. For now, we can skip performance and documentation and so on. I think we don't have enough time for that today, but a little preview here, basically the documentation can generate reports, like a visualization for the whole system, but also for a specific scope. Yeah, so it's more or less same functionality like visualization, but with the visualization and process, you have to define a starting point, like creation of an account. And with the documentation, you will see the whole system report. Yeah. So if you don't know what's going on, it's a good start point to take a look at the documentation. This will generate the whole map of your system automatically. And then you know, okay, I have so many components. You can set the complexity level of a project and so on. And that's the idea behind that. And yes, we can schedule some reports and so on. Okay. Then let me move on with the live demo. I've prepared a couple of examples here. Some of them are very common use cases, and the others are more or less special things which can occur sometimes, but also important things here. So let me start with the logical loops. Yeah. What I mean with logical loops is something, of course, there's a loop. Yeah. So one component will trigger another, and then you have infinity loops. So usually you will see that immediately. But if you have a big trigger chain with different components in between, yeah, it's very hard to identify those things. Yeah, and usually you say, okay, it can happen, but this is just a small chance. Yeah, okay, then it's good if some system tells you, hey, there's a risk of a logical loop, you should check that. Yeah. So this is what we do here, because sometimes it's not possible to tell you, okay, this is a 100% chance that this will fail. But there's a chance, yeah, and this is why you have to check it, yeah. And this is what we do with those things. So let me go back to my application here. So this is my system here, and let me, this is easier. So this is our application. I've already configured the integration. So in this case, I got integrations to Dataverse, to Azure, and to Azure DevOps as my source control system. And I got a couple of things here. So what I can do is I can search for components, but I can also take a look at the best practices. So I would like to start with best practices, okay? As I said, there is a component, and we have something with logical loops. How is it called? Just loops. Oh, let me see. I think I forgot the name. Okay. This one it is, and this one it is. Yeah. Okay. So sorry, the name was different. Yeah. So, okay. It tells me something about, okay, there's a call, and maybe I will reach some limits. Yeah. So what it means is, if one plugin calls another plugin within the same execution pipeline, there's a limit. So if you have 8 levels, the system will throw an exception, and you cannot do that. So usually you have cases like, some inheritance or whatever. So you have an account, and you have some other accounts, and you would like to apply some changes based on the inheritance and so on. So this is a very common use case. So let's see what it is. This is our demo environment. By the way, this is sometimes very bad code. This is just a sample, so it doesn't make sense to understand this logic, but we don't see anything here, right? The only thing what we see is, okay, we have update of the target, yeah, which is a very bad thing. You should never do that. But okay, so I understand now why we have this kind of issue. So what I can do now is I got the components bad account plugin. So let's see what it does. As I said, this is the documentation. So this is basically a visualization of the whole environment. Yeah, it can be very complex sometimes, but here I think it's a small one, so I can use it. And this one was account plugin. This is not enabled. Okay, so it must be the other one. Let's see. Oh, this one looks interesting. Okay, so update account. Let's see what it does. It is the same event. Okay, so okay, that's an interesting one. And this is basically what I usually do when I have to analyze a system. I see, okay, I have something like this, which is a bad thing because in most cases you have some kind of circular dependency here, so this is a risk, yeah. So I have to check that, I have to go to the system and say, okay, is this okay or not, yeah? So this is my first call here, but the second thing is what I can do is, okay, I know now, okay, there might be a logical loop. And so I can go to the customer and to the user and tell them, hey guys, do you have any performance issues? Do you have any problem with accounts? And in most cases, they tell me, okay, yeah, if I try to create an account, it takes too much time and so on. And then it's the right time to figure out, okay, what's going on behind the scenes. Yeah. So I start with account in this case. Those are just a few examples. I also can search for that. And takes a few seconds. Let's see. Oh, okay, great. So what I have here now is the analytics part. And as you can see, I got a couple of components and all of them are related to account in some way, sometimes directly and sometimes not. So I got the triggers, which basically means, okay, this component will be triggered by the following events. And then the actual API calls. And when I'm talking about API calls, remember that I had a slide regarding the scope of today. I mean, of course, HTTP calls, but also calls to Azure Service Bus, business events from Dynamics Finance and so and other things like this, database calls. So there are many different APIs. Yeah. So let's see. Okay, our use case is create an account. Let's see what happens if I do that. So okay, let me fix the layout here. So I got a couple of components here. This one is not interesting. Okay, this is our bad one, but this is another one with the same event as a trigger and as an API call. So I think this is a bad one as well. So let's see what we have. This is the rest. Okay, cool. So now I know I got create account, and after that I have two different events. And this is the interesting part. Yeah, this is basically what I always do. Yeah, I go to the system and try to figure out, okay, what is the whole chain of calls here, and that way it's very easy for me to identify what's going on. I mean, if you compare it to a manual approach where you have to take a look at the code, you have to open it, and sometimes it's very complex because you have a lot of different classes and different structures in the code, then it's very hard to figure that out, especially if you do not have a technical background. There's actually no chance to do it. Yeah. And also, as I said, I'm too lazy for that. Yeah. I mean, I don't want to open the sorry, how's it called? The Cloudflow, yeah, so the Logic app or whatever, and search in the whole thing. Yeah, so it takes too much time. Yeah, and here it's just a matter of seconds. Yeah. So back to the use case here. When I create an account, I will see after that what I have is update of another account. Okay, so I have the same thing. I have create, I have update, and now there are a lot of different calls. So let's see what we have here. Yeah, so I'm not going to go through the whole thing here. This is just a basic example to show you what's going on. And after the update, I think I have this one and a lot of other things. So usually I would take a closer look at this one and then see what's going on. Yeah. Execute transaction request is also a bad thing. So yeah, and after that, okay, there's something going on with the service bus as well. So yeah, you can see I can easily go through the system and analyze, okay, what's going on. Then let's get back to our second use case, resource intensive APIs. Yeah. What it means is, yes, there are a couple of official recommendations from Microsoft regarding Power Platform, regarding different components in Azure, and some of them are based on our experience, and some components or some recommendations are generated by AI components and so on. So there's a big pool from different recommendations, but a very important thing is all of them are customized to their own environment. Yeah, so it's always difficult when you say, okay, you should not do this, you should not do that. Yeah, but how can you be sure that in the whole code base, when we're talking about millions of lines of code or 100,000 of lines of code, that you do not violate any of those? So this is actually not possible, and we apply it directly to your environment. So let's see if we have something with this one, which basically means you should not create documents, or you should not create any memory consuming objects like, Word documents, PDFs, yeah, and so on. Because yes, hardware resources are limited in the cloud, so do not forget that even if you have many users, yeah, it's still limited. Yeah. So let's see if we have an example here. Back to our report. Sorry. Yeah, it's here. Okay. What do we have here? Let's see. Okay. We have, for example, this one. This is something related with image generation. And yeah, if you have it just once, it's no problem. But we're talking about shared memory in a cloud environment. And that means if you do that and you have many executions because you have a lot of users, I think the memory limit right now is something about 300 or 400 megabytes in total. So I'm not 100% sure regarding this limit, but it's somewhere between 300 and 400 megabytes. And if you generate a lot of images, yeah, I think you can reach that limit pretty soon. So yeah, that's the reason why you should not do that. Of course, there are a lot of different APIs and third-party packages and so on. So this is another thing what we check. And yeah, I can tell you a lot of funny stories regarding that. Especially when it comes to big projects, this is another thing you see that in production. Yeah, you will never see that on the integration environment and so on, because usually you don't have such a heavy load there. Yeah, but when we're talking about enterprise environment, production system, then you usually have issues with this kind of thing, and then it's a major problem because it's not easy to move those things. Yeah, I mean, what should you do when you generate documents or you generate some audio files or whatever in your Dataverse environment? It's not easy to move it to another thing where I can apply, a heavier workload. Any components like a web app and so on in Azure, you can scale on your own, so you don't have this problem. This is actually the recommended approach. So yeah, let's see what else do we have here. Missing data model, that basically means, okay, you should generate early bound entities. Yeah, I know there are different opinions about that, but at the end, if you type it manually, what's the point? Yeah, I don't understand that. So there's always a risk for typos and so on. So why should we do that now? I mean, we have a couple of examples here. Let's see. For example, here, this one, unknown entity, value. So in this case, it's some kind of option set or so on, and it says, okay, the value is different. Yeah, so there's something wrong with the data model. And if you have generated data models early upon entities, yeah, you don't, have a risk that you run into issues like this. So same is for, typos and so on. So there are many different things like this. So yeah, then let's see what else do we have. I mean, as I said, I will not go through all of the different kind of violations here. Just a few examples. So for the common ones, let's take a few. This is an interesting one. Daytime now. usually the people think it's not important, but it is. Yeah. So if you deploy your code to a cloud environment, you cannot be sure that the time zone is the same. So you should always use UTC because it totally makes sense, right? Even if you have a project in just one country or one time zone, yeah, you should go with with UTC. Yeah, it makes sense. Yeah. So and that's the point. Yeah. Usually the people telling me, oh, we don't need that because we know how to deal with that. We do not use the local time zone. Yeah. But do we really want to check that every time when somebody is, new in the team and you're not sure if they know the rules and so on? So yeah, as I said, I'm too lazy for that. So I think it's a very important one. What else do we have? Yeah, we got a couple of things related to deployments. Of course, you should not have any components with the new prefix as a publisher. This is a very bad thing, yeah. But I mean, it works, yeah, but it's very confusing for the people, and at the end, you will have, some kind of nightmare with the different layers and so on. So, same thing is, of course, for entities, for attributes, and so on. So, there are a couple of things what you can have here. What else do we have? Email relationship and so on. This is basically right. So the type, so a data model, and yeah, I think it's a long list. So let's go back to the plugins. The common ones are not so interesting. The default version, yeah, I think as I said, it makes sense to apply versioning and so on. So there are a couple of small things, but it's very useful when it comes to issues on production environments. So if you really want to be sure, okay, this is the right code, yeah, there are no, hidden changes, yeah, because sometimes developers try to connect to the system directly and, replace some assemblies and so on. So this is why I love to have versioning applied to the solutions, to my JavaScript, TypeScript files. So any kind of code-related thing should be versionized. So that makes sense. What else? Yeah, plugin bases and so on. As I said, we have issues if we have plugin chains with a lot of different calls. I think we already talked about that. This is also a very interesting one. Yeah, parallel execution. There are many different ways, at least in C# you can do that. You can use tasks, you can use threads manually, so there are different APIs how to handle it. But in the end, it's always a risk, yeah, because those things like organization service and also for Dynamics Finance and so on, they are different, of course, classes and so on, and most of them are not thread safe. So you should not execute anything in parallel. Yeah, and this is a very important point because, as I said, yeah, usually you don't have issues on the low environments like dev, integration, and so on. This is a hidden trap for production only. Yeah, and that's why it's so important to make sure that we don't have this thing. And I mean, in this case, we can take a look at the example here. It's a very, very easy one. So as I said, okay, I got my plugin here, and then I got a couple of examples. And let's say it's called bad pattern logic. There is a lot of bad logic, obviously. So let's take a look at that. We just talked about, say, parallel execution call. So this one, yes. So what do we have here? I think it's the first one, yes. And that's very easy. Yeah. So I have a call here, and it selects some stuff, and then there's a parallel execution here, yeah. But usually it's not that easy. Yeah? You have different classes, you have different dependencies, you have nested calls and so on. So it's pretty hard to figure out what's going on, because if I insert another function here, so not directly the creation, so I call another class, another service, and so on, then I have a bigger chain of calls, and it's not easy to figure out what's going on. And as I said, a couple of other things like, by the way, this is a plugin context. It's very important. So we do not analyze the whole thing. We analyze basically from the entry point, like a plugin or a web API, until the actual call. Yeah. So if I have a call like this here, for example, what I usually have to do manually is, okay, I got the request here. I see this is a execute transaction request, which is okay, you can use that, but not within the plugin context, yeah, or code activity context, or custom action, and so on. And this is the tricky part, yeah. So I have to basically trace back the whole thing here to any plugin or any entry point. Yeah. So in this case, it's easy because I know, okay, this is the call, this is the method, this is my plugin. I got the entry point here or somewhere in the base class, and I will execute it there. So now I know, okay, this is a bad thing, we have to fix it. But yes, it's easy if I see it directly, but in most cases, it's a little bit more complicated. And this is what we do. We analyze the whole thing from the entry point until the actual call. Then let's see, what else do we have? Yeah, a couple of other things like this one. As I said, yeah, you should not use a patch request for a transaction and so on. So there are a couple of things that you should not do. And before we go to another example, I think when we are done with this round, and we're going to publish our documentation soon, the updates where we have the full list of different rules. So right now, I think this is enough regarding that. Then let me go back to the documentation, and I will not talk about the different integrations and so on. I think it's not important for us right now. The last thing I would like to show you is basically the overview. As you can see, I have different components here, and sometimes it's pretty hard to do that. We are currently working on some filters and so on, but at the end, you see the whole system, and that's the point. Yeah, so you have all of the technologies included. Even special cases like TypeScript and so on are supported. So that's actually a pretty cool thing to identify any problems and so on. And as I said, this whole thing is based on static analytics. Yeah, so we do not execute a single line of code. We do not trigger anything. Yeah, we connect to the different environments like Dataverse, like Dynamics F&O, and so on, with read-only connections. Yeah, so we do not change anything. That's a very important statement regarding the whole platform here. Okay, then let me go back to my slides here. As I said, we have the case creation process. Actually, I skipped this because it's more or less the same. Here in System Overview, we have seen that. Then when I have the technical scope again, this is basically a reminder to rethink a little bit about the whole thing, what is possible, because usually you have multiple applications, you have different components within those applications, different integrations and so on. So for example, in F&O, you have many business events, yeah, and usually you don't know, okay, which integration is currently enabled for this event and which is actually where's the code, yeah. So you have to talk to different people, and it's pretty hard to figure it out, yeah. And of course, it's usually a very time-consuming thing, and you don't want to do that. So you really should check that automatically, which is why we think the platform really makes sense for many enterprise projects. And yeah, regarding the integrations, I mentioned that, yeah, we have different integrations. Yeah, this is just an example here with the different connections here and the caches, because when you initially start the whole process, you have to build up the cache. And this is what we call, okay, system jobs in the background. So you configure the connection, then you say you update the cache or update the sources. So it takes a few seconds. If you have a bigger code base, usually a few minutes, and then the whole thing is basically cached, and you can see the results within a few seconds. And yeah, I think regarding security and privacy, I will mention that, but this is just a reminder. If some of you have some questions at the end, feel free to ask anything about that as well. And now I think it's time to take a look at the questions here. And talking about early access, I will explain a little bit more about that later. But let me take a look at the questions first. Let's see if we have a couple of questions here. By the way, no rush. I will stay in the call for a few more moments, so it's okay. So let me take a look at the questions here. Okay, so where can I find the best practice check from Power Platform? Well, I'm not sure if I understand the question correctly, but there are different, as I said, different sources. Yeah, so of course there are official recommendations from Microsoft, and there are a couple of recommendations from the industry itself. So like, okay, you should use source control, you should have unit tests and so on. So a couple of things, yeah. And what we did is basically we merge all of those sources and say, okay, this is basically our rule set, and based on that, we can tell you, okay, what's going on. But again, our focus here is to provide that automatically, yeah. Because of course you can define some kind of rules for your team and say, okay, you have to follow those rules, but how can you be sure that everybody's doing that? Yeah, and that's the point. So you don't have to check this thing manually. And regarding third-party libraries, Nugget packages, yes, we do support that. So what you can do is you can upload the package or the DLL or whatever, and it will be analyzed. And then you have a couple of questions. Yeah, so usually you can say, okay, this package will call this API and so on. So we will analyze that for you. Then you can change it or you confirm it. So it is supported. Okay, let me see what we have here. Is it? Okay. There's a question regarding in different environments. So yes, so basically when you integrate, so when you do the setup, it's very easy. Let me quickly go back to the slide with the equations. So what you have to do is to say, okay, configure, then you have the URL, you have the credential types. In this case, it's enterprise app, which means app registration and enterprise application on the customer side. But of course, you can also use username and password and application users. So at the end, it's really easy, yeah. And then you click on save, and that's it, yeah. So it's very easy. Regarding different environments, yes, we're currently working on that. As I said, when you have dev, UAT integration and so on, it should be the same, right? So the logic itself should be the same, but if you have a common customizations requirement and you have different instances for each developer, you can connect to different environments. So we will enable this feature within the next releases, but I'm not sure when exactly. Okay. Then what else? Okay, let's see if we have another example here. In the meantime, you of course, regarding the access and so on, right now the whole core technology is stable enough to analyze the systems and so on. So this works quite well. We do have some issues with the UI and so on. So some small glitches, but I think it's good enough to understand the basic ideas. But as I said, right now it's early access, so feel free to scan the code, open the link, and then you can reach out to us and we can talk about little things. We will also open a public Q&A channel, so you can also ask some questions after the session if you want. In the meantime, feel free to reach out on LinkedIn. Okay, let's see if we have any other questions here. Yep. Okay, data privacy. Yeah, I think that's a good question regarding data privacy as well. Yeah, as I said, yeah, we do not change anything. It's a read-only access, and of course, from time to time, you have to update the code. So this is basically just a simple click, and this will get the new sources and so on. So this is pretty easy. There are also some kind of features to enable that automatically. So overnight, it will automatically scan the system. So you have the new results on the next day. That's a feature which is actually also in preview right now, but it works quite good. Yeah. If I don't have any other questions, I can move on to my contact slide, which is the last one. Again, I'm Robert Pröll, so feel free to reach out if you need anything in most cases, LinkedIn is better. Yeah, so I can reach out to my colleague Wayne. He can also help you if you have any questions. Okay, then I think I'm done for today. Thanks for joining today, and yeah, and feel free to reach out if you have any questions. Of course, the trial right now is for free, so you can play around a little bit, and we will help you with the setup and so on if you need it. So again, thanks for listening, and goodbye.